All right, cool. So listen, the Roman Empire, they beat everybody. Like that's it. Like that. I mean, and that's an obvious point because like if they didn't beat everybody, you wouldn't know about them. Like we know very little about a lot of empires because they didn't just beat everybody into submission with their military all the time. But the Roman Empire, they would send their military into a place and they would win time after time, over and over. They got very used to it. It is how they expanded. It's how they became a thing. It is why you now know who they are, right? This is what it is. The Roman Empire, they win. They won. It's what they did. But there are exceptions to their undefeated streak, right? Like they weren't undefeated and they didn't always win. They usually won and they usually did not get defeated, but every now and then they ran into a problem. And a couple thousand years ago, the Roman Empire decided to spread out and conquer an area that we now call Scotland. And they decided that we are going to conquer Scotland. And they were unprepared for what they would find in Scotland. So they roll up with their army and look, just so we're clear, this is what always happened. Okay, the Romans would show up, they would roll out their army, they would do this thing, they would pick a fight, right? There would be a battle, they would win, and then they would, conquer the place. This is why we're talking about the Romans in general all the time in the Bible. That's what they did to Israel, right? Like they showed up and just took over. And this is how they do it. They show up, they pick a fight, they win the fight, they take over, and it's what happens. And that is the way of just the reality of dealing with Rome. But when they showed up to Scotland, they ran into a group of people that did not behave the way that they had usually seen people behave. They showed up, and first of all, they show up and they just meet these people that are just stark naked, as it just could not be less clothed. Just stark naked, naked as the day God made them, except they were covered head to toe in tattoos. This is actually where they get their name. The Romans end up naming them after their word for tattoos, and they call them the Pict people, P-I-C-T, the Pict people. They say that these Picts are, they're just head to toe in this blue ink. That's what the ink that they had. And so head to toe, tattoos, head to toe, naked. And they meet these people and they think, okay, well, on the one hand, we've got some weirdness with the tattooing. That's strange. They at least have a pretty good pain tolerance. On the other hand, though, they're not wearing any clothes. This should be a fairly simple battle. And they line up for the battle. They go to pick a fight. And the picked people do a strange thing. They run away. Just abandon everything. Just full evacuation, refusing to engage in the battle. And the Romans are like, man, picked people, they may have a high pain tolerance, but they are cowards. Well, I guess Scotland's ours. And so they do the next thing. They begin to set up camp, and they begin to do the thing that, they get there and they set up tents. You can imagine what you might do. Like the first thing they did was start a fight. The second thing is, I guess this is where we're going to be, so let's set up a temporary place, and they set up their camp. This is, of course, a large group of people. It's a large army, and so it's a large camp. It takes a lot of work and a lot of manpower to get this done. And so they drop their armor and they drop their weapons and they go to get to working on the camp. And as they're in the middle of working on the camp, suddenly a horde of naked, tattooed, picked people comes out of the forest and ambushes them and slaughters them. I mean, the Romans can't even pick up a spear before they're dead, slaughtering them. They were ruthless, they were exceedingly violent, and they did not care at all about their well-being. These are people going into battle with people covered in armor, and they are naked. They don't care. Just destruction of the Romans. So the Romans have to now retreat. And they kind of get back to their senses, and they're like the survivors show up, and they're talking about what just happened because nobody's ever done that to them. That's not how you fight. That's not honorable. That's not it's not good. That's not the way people that's fighting dirty. They cheated, right? And so, I don't know what's gonna happen. And again for the next several hundred years, for about 400 years, this plays out over and over and over. It is like Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. And the picked people have an inside track to the Acme company. And over, they have a new trick. Over and over, they never give them a real fight. They never stand toe-to-toe. They refuse to engage under any honorable terms. And instead, they just stab them in the back over and over, and they do it while never wearing clothes. Finally, after about 400 years of defeat, the Roman army says, look, we estimate that we have killed over 10,000 of these guys, and they just keep coming. They refuse to stop. Maybe we'll just leave Scotland alone. And they went and found somebody else to attack. The picked people, the naked, tattooed warriors of Scotland, defeated the Roman Empire for centuries. So after about 400 years, we're all acquainted with one another now, right? We all know what's going on. And some Christian missionaries, this is a new concept, really. Before they were Christian missionaries, they were just Christians. But these Christian missionaries, this is about 400 years or so after the death of Christ, they decide, well, let's go live with the picked people. And everybody's like, that's a terrible idea. They're going to slaughter you. This is what they do to the Roman army. And the missionaries are like, well, look, yeah, that's kind of our thing. Like, we're kind of okay with dying because, the Romans did it first and the Jews did it, and all this, like, everybody hates us. So let's go. And now that, like, this is at this point the empire is somewhat Christian, let's go and try to be missionaries with these guys. And they found something funny. If you're not trying to conquer them, the picked people are just lovely. Just lovely people. They just welcome them in, like, yeah, let us show you how to farm. Let us show you, this plant is fun. This tree is nice. Here's an animal you can befriend. Here's an animal you can raise and use its milk. And they showed these Christian missionaries how to live in Scotland. And they were just friends. And so the Christian missionaries were like, yeah, cool. Well, can we tell you about Jesus? And the picked people were like, absolutely not. No, we don't care about Jesus. We have our own religious stuff going on. We don't care about yours. Also, your God kept telling you to, like, kill us. So not a big fan of your God at the moment, at least. So tell you what, we won't be brothers, but we can be friends. And so that's how it was. For another 180 to 200 years or so, the picked people and the Christians lived at peace with one another. The Christians built a monastery or several monasteries. They began to do their thing, building churches, building communities. The picked people, who are just absolutely just tickled to death to have friends, are, everybody's happy. They're trading information. Everything's great. But the religious side of it, they never really cross. And then in the 6th century, about 563 or so, there's a guy by the name of Columba who shows up. Not Columbus. Way later, Columba shows up. He's also way nicer than Columbus, but Columba shows up, and Columba he's a monk. He is there working at the monastery, and he's a good dude. He's an overall good dude, and he's like, look, you guys, we'll respect you guys. We're never going to try to convert you. We're never going to try to fight with you. We're never going to do anything like that. We just want to be friends, and Columba does that, and so he becomes friends very quickly with the picked people. And one day, Columba and a group of other monks are out doing what you might do in 6th century Scotland, which is roaming the forests, right? Like, I don't know what you do, but they were roaming the forests, and they were out, on the trails doing all this stuff. And they come across a river. It's the Ness River, or the River Ness, if you'd like. And they come across a group of picked people, fishermen, who are burying somebody who has passed away. And as they're burying them, Columba goes up. He says, hey, guys, what's going on? Can we help? What's happened? And they explain that there's this sea monster in the river, which I suppose makes it a river monster. There's a monster in the river. And they describe this guy. And they're like, yeah. They're like, well, why have you not told us about this thing? And they're like, well, it's kind of scary. We don't always tell you stuff. You guys never really come over here, so we didn't really tell you there's a monster over here. But we've been dealing with this monster for a long time, and sometimes, he attacks people. He doesn't really eat them. He just attacks them. It's just a territory thing, basically. And so they're burying this guy. He went too far out and he got attacked by this monster. And Columba's like, well, I mean, I could take care of that for you guys. Columba having this irrational confidence for some reason. It's like, I could totally take care of that for you. And they're like, you can't, but we'll go ahead and watch because we think it's funny. So yeah, go for it. Take care of the river monster. Have at it. And so Columba is like, I need a volunteer for this plan. And I love that he got one. I just love it. There's this, one of the monks is like, I'll do it. And so he puts this monk in a boat. He's like, I need you to ride out there and then jump in the water. You're bait. And this guy's like, yeah, absolutely. I got nothing better to do today. And I've always wanted to be bait for a, river monster. So he goes in, he runs out, he takes all his clothes off, a lot of nudity in this story, and he takes all his clothes off and he jumps in the river. And sure enough, here comes this massive, like dinosaur-looking creature. And Columba picks up this he being, this ancient, monk guy. He has this huge cross. He picks up this cross like on a walking stick, and he prays, and he rebukes this river monster in the name of the Lord. And their story, not mine, the river monster stops in its tracks and swims away. And so the guy comes back, the guy who was bait, that monk is like, that was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. I'm very anxious now. But that was neat. And the Pict people, without a sermon, without like being convinced, after 200 years of ignoring the Christian religion, say, well, if your God can do that, we want to follow that God. And they all got baptized in that river at that moment. And they went back to their people, told them the story, and in mass, the Pict people convert to Christianity. Again, their story, not mine. Now, I'll tell you the story for a couple of reasons. The first reason I'm telling you the story is because that's the first story of the Loch Ness Monster. Yeah. He's tracking. He's the whole time. He's like, River Ness. Oh, I know that name. Yeah. It's Nessie, right? Like the first time it moved from the river to the loch is all it really did, right? It's all it did. And so, yeah, Loch Ness Monster. And that's fun. Come on, guys. Even if it's nonsense, it's fun. But it's also an interesting story of this whole people group. Right? This historically attested people group that we know was not Christian, was hostile to Christianity, then became Christians. Their explanation of how it happened, right? This is their story. Like if you doubt that this happened, like, okay, fine, but you are doubting the word of indigenous people to an area. By the way, as an aside, we all want to be progressive and we all want to listen to people's stories, and then their stories don't match up with what we think happens, and we're like, well, they must be wrong. That's dumb. Stop doing that. We should stop doing that. Like, it's their story. Let them tell their stories. Back to the story. Anyway, they did not become Christians because somebody told them about the love of Jesus. They did not become Christians because they understood God and his grace and mercy and compassion. They did not become Christians because of every good gift coming from above, from a only good God who is light and life. All of the things that we teach about our God and our Lord and our Savior, none of that convinced them. They were uninterested in the gospel as we explain it. What they were interested in was, we've got this thing we're scared of, and y'all took care of it, so we're changing teams. Their conversion was entirely based in fear. That's it. They became Christians because they were afraid of something, and then obviously, if the thing they're afraid of is, cast out by another something, well, they should be afraid of that something. Their faith was built on fear. And you're probably thinking about this moment. Well, yeah, of course, right? Like this was 1600 years ago, 1500 years ago. Ancient people always are driven by fear. And if you're thinking that, like, I mean, I guess I agree, but also we should probably have a little bit of humility and understand that, like, it's not just ancient people that are driven by fear. For example, you guys all came to church today in a car and you wore a seatbelt. And there's only two reasons you wore a seatbelt. Because you're afraid of getting in an accident and going through the windshield. So you wore a seatbelt. Or if you don't, it's going to beep at you. Which means somebody is afraid you're going to go through a windshield. And either way, seatbelts are modern inventions built on fear. You might be thinking, though, I would never wear a seatbelt. I'm too cool for seatbelts. If that's you, yeah, me too. I never wore a seatbelt until I had a car that yelled at me. I get it. Fine. But you know what I did last night before I went to bed? I locked my front door. Also, I have a Ring camera. And it's funny, last week we were doing the door hangers thing for the Back to School Festival, and so we were putting door hangers on people's doors. Everybody has a Ring camera. Like nice houses, terrible houses, in-betweeny houses. Everybody has a Ring camera, and there's only two reasons to have a Ring camera. Either you're afraid of home intruders, or you're afraid that somebody's going to steal your Amazon package off the front step. But either way, y'all bought those Ring cameras, and you didn't do it because you're not afraid of something. You did it because you are afraid of something. It's possible those first two didn't land. Let me do one more. I've never met a person who, around April 15th, got on TurboTax, and they said, my favorite time of year. I love paying taxes because I love good roads. I love supporting our teachers and education in schools. I love programs for people that need help socially. I love paying money to the federal government because I think they can spend it more than me. I think they're smarter than me. So I love to pay taxes. I've never met a person that way. And if you have met a person that way, it's probably time to call, like, somebody for help. No, y'all pay your taxes for the same reason I do. I don't want to go to prison. That's it. I am more afraid of going to prison. I watched Oz when I was in high school, okay? You know, some of y'all watched Orange is the New Black. We have all these shows about prison. Like, I don't want to go to prison. It seems terrifying, and I ain't built for it. So I pay my taxes because I don't want to go to prison. And you pay your taxes because you don't want to go to prison. Not a single person in this room wants to pay taxes, but you do it because you're afraid not to. I keep going, but the point is, it is astounding how much of our lives are built on fear. I am afraid of this consequence. I am afraid of this outcome. I am afraid of what happens if. Therefore, I will do this. I will build this. I will buy this. I will pay this. So much of what we do is based in fear. And it's not wrong. It just is what it is. And so the question has to be asked as religious people, as Christian people, what relationship should fear have with our faith? Are we as Christians supposed to say, I'm not afraid of God? Or should we be saying, man, the God who made everything, the creator of all things, is a pretty big, powerful being. I should naturally be afraid. Like, is our faith supposed to have any fear in it? Or should we say, well, perfect love casts out all fear? And if God is love and we are loving people, you know, we are born in love, we will die in love, all that, like, all the stuff I've been preaching for like 19 years, like all the love stuff, like does that just mean that we're not afraid of anything? It's a good question. And part of why it's a good question is because the Bible doesn't super help all the time. I mean, it helps. It just doesn't help in the way we'd like it to help. Here's what I mean. Towards the end of his life, at the end of his life, the Apostle Paul writes a letter to another preacher by the name of Timothy, and he's giving him his like final instructions. And one of the things he does as he gives these instructions to Timothy, he's trying to kind of like pump him up and give him courage. And this is what we read in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. Paul says, God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. Perfect. We are not supposed to be afraid. We're not supposed to be timid. In fact, Paul takes a couple things. This is one of the things that he does as a writer a lot. Paul's great with this. He takes these ideas and he compares and contrasts them. He says that power, love, and self-discipline are on one side of the fence, and on the other side of the fence is fear and timidity. That those are opposites. And we want power and love and self-discipline, right? Perfect. So don't be afraid. There it is. Series over. We have an invitation, and I'm just kidding. That's not it. Because there's also this. There's this Old Testament gem in the book of Proverbs, verse 1, also 1:7. I did that on purpose. It says this, fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. In this, you have the opposite of Timothy, not just in the fact that, like, it's also, this is what's saying you should be afraid, but this is actually connecting ideas. In this one, it says that wisdom and discipline are attached to knowledge, which comes from fear. So you should fear the Lord to have knowledge and wisdom and discipline. And you're thinking, okay, well, those seem to contradict. Yeah. The Bible does that sometimes. I know you might have been taught otherwise, but no, it does. I have an idea. Maybe it's just that that's an Old Testament passage, and the New Testament passage is the better one. Perfect. I'm so glad we're tracking. I'm so glad we're thinking this through. Acts chapter 10 says this. Peter replied, I see very clearly that God shows no favoritism. In every nation, he accepts those who fear him and do what's right. This passage connects fear in doing what's right and also connects God's acceptance of you in any nation with being afraid. Okay. I'm not the first person to point this out. This is the thing. There's a lot of verses in the Bible, and a bunch of them say don't be afraid, and a bunch of them say be afraid. And so a lot of folks have said, okay, well, let's just puzzle our way through this. And they've come up with this beautiful system. I remember being taught this in like 8th grade, like 9th grade. I remember being taught that this is the solution to this. The solution goes like this, that there's a difference between, oh my goodness, I'm scared of the Saw movie or the Ring or Poltergeist, right? Like I'm afraid of that. And I have respect for something, right? That there's a difference between fear and respect, but they're connected ideas. So we should respect God while not fearing God. And I got to tell you, that is a fantastic way to deal with this problem. It's also totally incorrect. This is the problem. Sometimes we just have to admit that sometimes very neat, tidy solutions to things, while great, are just dead wrong. It's funny. We actually have like the whole Bible in the original language that it was written, and also in other languages. And so, like, we have the Bible that Jesus walked around with, which is called the Septuagint. That's the Greek version. And so, what we know is that the Old Testament has a whole lot of verses about fear, and the New Testament in the same language is a whole lot of verses about fear, and it's all the same word. There's just no way around. The Bible has a mixed message about fear. And in a world where so many people make so many terrible decisions based on fear, and in a world where so many people make very reasonable decisions based on fear, and in a world where we understand that God is love and light and life and all the things that Christ taught us, the question has to be asked, what does it mean to fear God? Should we? And how does that impact me in the day-to-day? We're starting a new series. 4 weeks, month of August, called Don't Be Afraid, Question mark. What are we supposed to do with all this? How do we navigate these passages other than just ignoring them? And what does it mean for us in the day-to-day as we are people who want to follow God? We got 4 weeks to kind of stretch our legs and think about this whole question. We're going to talk about it for the next month or so. But for this morning, we got to start with a foundation, okay? We got to start with the ground floor. We got to start building this house. And as we do, as we begin to answer this question, we need to tell a story. It's a very familiar story. I don't have to go super into it, but it's a story that we all know. And it's a story of the people of Israel as a nation. So the nation of Israel begins with a guy. His name's Abraham. And then it goes with a family, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And then it becomes a nation, like a whole group of people. And that's how they basically find themselves in Egypt. For 400 years, they are in Egypt as slaves. And then a guy shows up. His name is Moses, raised as an Egyptian, but is actually Jewish. And he demands that the Pharaoh lets God's people go. The Pharaoh has no interest in doing this. He likes his slaves. And so it takes a whole, plagues and stuff like that. And finally, a bunch of miracles and a bunch of plagues and a bunch of stuff, and the people of Israel are finally let go. And that event is called the Exodus. And that becomes a foundational event in the story of every Jewish person, like back then and also today. Like the Exodus is kind of it. They celebrate their most important holiday, the Passover, based on the last plague, based on what finally allowed them to be free. And so Moses leads them, and that's that, we usually say. The thing about it is that's only half the problem for the people of Israel. It's not exactly just that they are now no longer slaves, right? But not being a slave doesn't actually mean a lot. It's not just that they didn't want to be slaves, it's that they wanted a home for themselves. They wanted to be a people that could live at peace, who could have security, who could just, it's not just not being a slave, but they wanted to be free. And so for about a year, Moses leads the people of Israel through the desert to a land that God wants them to enter. It's called Canaan, and that is where he wants them to be a people. The problem is there's already people there. And so Moses sends a group of people, 12 of them, one for every tribe. He sends a group of spies into the land as sort of like advanced scouts. They're the scout team. If this is a football team, they're the ones going in and just kind of preparing the way for everybody else. And they spend 40 days in the land, checking out the land, seeing who's there, seeing what's going on, all of that. At the end of those 40 days, the spies come back and they talk to Moses. And they say, we've got good news and we've got bad news. The good news is the land is super cool. It's the land of milk and honey. We could live there forever. This is phenomenal. The bad news is, how there was a nation that we just escaped from? There's 5 of them here. And you know how the pharaohs weren't super nice? Yeah, these guys are way worse. If we go into this land and try to settle, they're just going to kill us and we're going to be done. And Moses says, okay, well, what do you think we should do? And the 12 spies get together. And 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, say, I think we should do what God told us to do, which is just go in the land and do our thing, and I'm sure he'll protect us and it'll be fine, right? Let's just do the thing. And the other 10 are like, nope. Those guys are terrifying. I do not want to go there. This is a horribly scary situation. I want out of this. And so the end of that story is that God says, okay, no problem. The generation that is fine with that, because the people just go with the 10. He's like, the generation doesn't want to go in, that generation won't go in. And they wander the desert for 40 years. And the end of that story is that Joshua leads a new generation into Canaan. And the story just kind of is on pause for a generation. Okay. So let's puzzle the story out. The people of Israel don't want to go into Canaan because they are afraid. Their fear is stopping them from doing what God wants them to do. And this seems very reasonable to them because it doesn't do any good to go in and get killed. In fact, they don't just say, let's not go in. They actually say, let's go back to Egypt. I bet they'll like make us slaves again. Like we could be slaves. At least we got a house. At least we got food. Slavery isn't so bad. Like if you're alive, or it's either death or slavery. It feels like. And the people of Israel are terrified of Canaan. And because they're terrified of Canaan, they are willing to go back to Egypt. A funny thing, though, if you read the Bible carefully, I feel like we rarely stop to ask or think about why the Jewish people are slaves in the first place. You might know the actual like technical answer, but we rarely think it through. If you read the story of Exodus, Pharaoh looks at this situation and says, okay, there's so many Jews. They keep having babies. There's so many of them. If we ever went to war, we'd lose. And then they could just have our nation. So why don't we preemptively enslave them, and then they'll never do it again? They'll never go to war with us, right? Which is to say, the only thing that kept Israel slaves in Egypt was their fear of the pharaohs that they didn't need to be afraid of. The pharaohs thought they'd lose. That's why they enslaved them. The people of Israel, terrified of their slave owners, terrified of this whole situation, stay slaves for centuries because they simply don't agree with what the pharaoh said. Which is to say, if we zoom out, if you think about this, like you've got Egypt and you've got Canaan and you've got the wilderness. The people of Israel are afraid in Egypt. The people of Israel are afraid in the wilderness. The people of Israel are afraid in Canaan. It's all the same. It's all the same. They're afraid no matter what. Which is to say, the people of Israel did not get to choose whether or not they would be afraid. They got to choose which fear they could live with. They got to choose their response to the fear. They could choose to do what God wanted in the midst of the fear or not. But at no point could they choose whether or not they would actually be afraid. And as it turns out, that's very important because I think that's true for all of us. You can choose to get married or you can choose to stay single. But there are things in a marriage that are frightening. And there are things that staying single that are frightening. You can choose one job or the other, but in all of those, there are universal fears and there are things to be afraid of with switching jobs or moving away. You can choose to buy or choose to rent. You can choose to cut off that family member, right? You can choose to keep talking to that family member. You can choose to maintain this relationship. You can choose to end that relationship. You can choose this terrible habit. You can choose to end that terrible habit. You can choose to be anything at all. And in every single choice you make, there are things to be afraid of. We buy Ring cameras, we wear seatbelts, we pay our taxes. There's always something to be afraid of. You cannot opt out of fear. You just can't. But you can opt in to trusting God in your fear. You're always going to be afraid. There's so many things that are scary in this world. And if you disagree with that, get a medical condition one day. And then you got a whole host of fears. You think you're not afraid till the doctor says, well, this is what you've got or this is what your kids got. You know, like you think you're bulletproof till then. It's not just in this world that we live in. It's not just that we are afraid of things for ourselves. It's also being afraid of things for other people. Canaan, the wilderness, Egypt, all the same. And so Paul writes to this church in Philippi. And he gives them this verse that until we say all of this, doesn't seem to super make sense, right? Like, this is one of those passages that I've heard every preacher in the world be like, this is a confusing verse. It's not confusing even a little bit once we've said this. Paul writes this to the people of Philippi. He says, therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Everybody's always like, oh, I don't understand what the fear and trembling is. I mean, you do, you just don't want to say it. What Paul is saying here is that we're saved, perfect, beautiful. But the fear doesn't go away. Because the things we're afraid of don't go away, right? And so the question now is, how will I live? Will I live defined by that fear? Or will I live defined by what God is doing within me? Paul says it is God that works in you. Am I going to try to do everything in my life to escape the fear? Or am I just going to lean into it and trust, well, God can work through this too. It'll be okay. Or it won't, and God can work through that. The idea is not that we're never going to be afraid. The idea is that fear is not what defines us. It is God's work within us that defines us. And once we say that, then we understand that even the things that we are afraid of are things that God can work through. That when we are afraid, God is with us. That when we are afraid, that God is still guiding us and leading us. God doesn't remove the fear because God doesn't remove us from this world that we live in where there's so many things to be afraid of. Instead, what God does is he works with us like he works with the picked people. Nothing convinced them until they saw their fear face to face and they saw God in the midst of it. Or Joshua and Caleb, who absolutely did not have a different report from the other 10. There's 12 spies, right? They all reported, this is terrifying. It's just that Joshua and Caleb said, well, I think God can work with it regardless. Let's keep going. We cannot opt out of being afraid. But what we have to understand is that God is working with and through us as we are afraid, as we live in that fear, as we face our fears, as we meet new fears, that God is with us every step of the way. And we have been called not to try to run away and hide, not to try to escape, not to let our lives be driven by fear, but to trust God in the midst of it. We're going to spend the next 3 weeks after this talking about what some of that means specifically. But as we begin this series this morning that says, don't be afraid, we have to understand that right from the top, that's an impossibility. I understand Jesus always says it. I understand the angels always say, don't be afraid. But there's a reason they say don't be afraid, because, yeah, you're going to be afraid. And so as we begin this series of what it means to live a life where we're told to not be afraid, we learn this very first lesson. The first lesson from the series is this. We will always be afraid of something. And when we are afraid, we can trust God. We will always be afraid of something. And when we are afraid, we can trust God. We're going to sing a song. We offer an invitation each and every week to take God up on his offer of salvation. The Bible teaches us that we should repent and be baptized. When we understand who he is, that sounds like two things. I promise it's just one. In repentance, we are turning our backs on we used to be and turning towards God. In baptism, it is a symbolic act of us doing exactly that, where we join ourselves to Christ. Just as Christ was dead, buried, and raised, we as well are dead, buried, and raised. Never made a decision. Nice warm baptistry. Let's talk. If you're an immersed believer in Christ, you're looking for a perfect church home, it's not here. But we do serve a perfect God. We want to connect. We want to call. We want to cultivate. We want to meet new people, share the gospel, grow up while we do it. And we want to be people who are honest about the reality of everything. And that means, yeah, we're going to be afraid. And yeah, there's a lot to be afraid of in this world. But each time we meet a fear, we have a God who is with us that we can trust through it. no matter how it ends. And so that's what I want to do. We want to be people who trust and follow no matter what. As we stand,